So hi everyone, my name is Theresa and I will be your webinar host today, and I will have introduction slides next, but today you're joining the webinar leveraging the API of an electronic lab notebook for efficient data management. And we have 3 speakers with us today, 2 from companies and that uses SciNote for their data management needs, and 1, Miha, is from SciNote to give us a bit of an overview about API. We're gonna go into a bit of a more intro later on. So first of all, I want to share that I'm Theresa. I'm the content specialist here at SciNote, and my role is basically putting together materials and content and resources that could be helpful for you when it comes to managing your data and manage your information in the lab. So that's why I'm here today. And today I'll guide everyone through the webinar and also help facilitate questions and all that and discussions down the road. Occasionally I might chime in based on experience working on the content side of things. So yeah, hello everyone. And we're gonna start with a little bit of a housekeeping, a few things. The webinar format, we're gonna start with a quick introduction. And also today, especially, we're going to have a little bit of an overview of the API, not like on the level that involves a little bit of an intro, but also technical, just so that we can start everyone on the same level. And then we're going to go into the speaker presentations. We have Dave and Shyam here with us, who are going to share their use cases. Then we're going to go into a bit of a Q&A session. They might be an activity at the end. We'll see how it goes, but that's sort of the webinar format. There is a Q&A box, so please make sure to leave the your questions in the Q&A box. We will answer all the questions during the Q&A session. So hopefully we'll get to all the questions. There are also some questions that were submitted through the registration form, so we'll also get to that. Webinar recording and resources will be available next week, so we'll be sending those out as soon as they are available. And also remember to fill out our post-webinar survey with thank you in advance, but it really helps us to know our webinar performance and learn more about what topics you're interested in learning, or whether you have any thoughts to the webinar content as well as how the webinar goes. I also want to very quickly mention that we also have Laura behind the scene. You can see the SciNote team in the Zoom. That's Laura. Laura will be handling the logistic in the back end. Also, if there is any challenges or questions, if you leave that in the chat, Laura will be able to help to answer those questions. So let's start by introducing our speakers. We have 3 speakers today. Like I mentioned, we have Dave Varon, who is the Principal Data Engineer from Fog Pharma. After 11 years in broadcasting, 3 in finance, and 14 years in pharma and biotech, Dave's technology work has progressed from help desk through the network and system admin to full stack development, and most recently, what's mostly commonly known as data engineering now, that he is now involved in. He has an affinity for open, flexible systems that enable the crafting of novel solutions, which help solve the current problem as well as the next one, with little help and as much amusement as possible. Welcome, Dave.
Be here. Thank you.
Perfect. And Dave is going to have a little bit of introduction about what the Fog Pharma's work is involved. So we'll let Dave introduce that later on during the presentation. Next, we have Shyam, Ajudia. Shyam is a bioinformatics lead from Advanced Cellular Dynamics, a contract research organization. Shyam is the bioinformatics program lead at ICD. He joined the company in 2019 as a research associate, working primarily on molecular and cell biology, but has since migrated to managing data science and engineering for the company and establishing ACD's next generation sequencing program. Welcome, Shyam.
Thank you for having me.
Perfect. And as with Dave, Shyam is going to have a little intro about what the ACD's work later on. Finally, we have Miha Mencin, who is the Director of Development here at Sino. Miha has more than 15 years of experience in leading and managing IT and development teams on various projects. He joined Sino in 2019 to take on the Director of Development role, overseeing the software development process of Sino's electronic lab notebook. Welcome, Miha.
Hi.
Perfect. All right, so let's start with a little activity, a poll. So what we're interested in knowing is what are you considering using the API of electronic lab notebook for? And here you will see a poll popping up. Laura, please launch the poll. And if there's any issue with that, we're gonna go to the next slide. Perfect. So there are a few options here. You could be considering using this for connecting to other software, platforms, systems, think other software like LIMS or ERP or CRM, other databases, etc. You could also be thinking about migrating data from one system to another. You could be considering connecting with equipment that collect data, like flow cytometry systems or lab balances, which we've seen. It could also be for workflow automation, generating special reports or whatnot. There are also other possibilities. So if you're considering other possibilities, we'd be interested in using what you're considering if that option is not here. So check other. And then, or it could also be that you have no idea. Totally fine. You're just curious about finding out and want to learn more what API can do. We'll give it a few more minutes, well, a few more seconds for people to answer the question. Feel free to choose as many options as you are looking to use API for, and then we can go to the next step. All right. Laura, how are we doing with, perfect. So here's the result. So a lot of people are using it to connect to either equipment to collect data or considering connecting with software and platforms or systems. So that seems to be the primary use. And then there are also uses for migrating data from one system to another or workflow automation to kind of speed things up. And then we also have welcome for people who also just curious and want to learn more. So that's great to know. And I also want to mention that API is one option of integrating, and we're always exploring more options down the road. So we might have a webinar in the fall coming up soon. So, when we get to that point, make sure to stay on our email list and you will receive a notification then. So we've gone through those options, and those are the most commonly known options for API integration when it comes to with an electronic lab notebook. So we're going to go through quite a few examples here today with the use cases. And then if you have any questions about your special case, definitely follow up with us, but hopefully we can answer some questions in the Q&A session about how to meet those requirements. Finally, before we go into the presentation, one final quick overview about SciNote in case you are new to SciNote. SciNote is a lab digitalization company with the mission to help humanity benefit the most from science and to preserve research data for future generations. Our electronic lab notebook is a leading ELN with inventory, compliance, and team management tools. It is trusted by the FDA, USDA, the European Commission, and over 100K scientific professionals. I want to quickly mention that you can see in the screenshot that we recently launched our mobile app, which works really well with the Sino system that allows you to check out protocol steps during right at the bench side or upload results right at the bench. So that's something that we're really proud of. And if you're interested in this, make sure to check out our website or contact us in the future. All right, we're gonna go into the first presentation where Miha is gonna give us a brief overview of API as well as the API of SciNote's API, just so that we kind of have a sense starting point for everyone who are either familiar or not familiar with the API setup with the SciNote electronic lab notebook. Go ahead, Miha.
Yeah. Hi. So I wasn't quite sure of the audience and how the technical the audience of this webinar will be. So the idea is I'm getting from more general topics to more specific topics. So depending on how technical person you are or how close are you to the development, parts of this presentation will be boring. So because there will be some really general information to start with. So can we go to the next slide, please? So what is the API? In a most wide view, the API is a mechanism that enables different systems to talk between each other. and they can talk in a way that they don't need to know, internals of each other. So the idea is to have a general protocol of how the information between the systems should be exchanged. So nowadays the conversation mostly goes in a form of JSON. A few years back, there were XMLs, but these formats are predetermined and can be used by different programming language, by the different developers with the different backgrounds. So in today will be there are several different definitions of the APIs. There are different types of APIs. And today we'll be focusing on the RESTful web API. Next slide, please. So what are the benefits of having a tool that offers the APIs? There are three here, but there are numerous opportunities if you have a tool with the API. So first of all, I say here enhanced functionality, but what I really mean is a bit of customization. So if you have a tool that suits your needs almost perfectly, but there is this one thing that you want to do, so you can do it with some programming language, with some programming knowledge, and a bit of and with the use of the API. The second really important benefit is that if you bring a new system into your ecosystem that you have in your organization, this can be connected to the other systems. So SciNote can, for example, know the list of your clients that you hold in another system, and of course with the use of the API. And third one, which is of course connected to the previous one, is at the highest level, it offers you the ability to automate your processes or data flows or automating some repetitive tasks that people must do, and hence skipping the opportunity for human errors. So SciNote API is kind of does have all of these benefits. So but more concretely, SciNote lets you interact with the data entities inside the SciNote. So you can interact with the projects, you can read them, you can create new projects, experiments. You can read the statuses, whatever there is in a SciNote that you can see as a human, in the web interface, you can get into that. You can get that information through the API. Or if you want to create or update some data inside the SciNote, it lets you do it. So yeah, as I said, it has a RESTful interface. It talks through the common HTTP request. Most of the developers or even non-developers can use it. So it's quite a general tool. And we've seen many different use cases. So Shyam and David will be presenting them. So it is from a really small thing to this huge blown, putting SciNote into middle of 10 or 5 different tools and automating stuff and designing the data flows, designing the processes you have in your organization. I just wanted to mention webhooks. So webhooks are kind of a complementary mechanism to the API. It's they're usually referred as a inverted API. So the difference between the API and the webhooks is that API is usually a passive system. So you need to call it, say, okay, give me the list of the projects, or you can say, okay, create a new project, or give me this specific project. And usually this is not the best, not the best approach, you know, to see if something new is happening in SciNote, for example. So what traditionally would be done, it would be like reading a list of projects and see the latest changes and then do something with those changes. So webhooks are different. Webhooks are configurable in the SciNote to track the changes that are happening inside the SciNote and then notifying the external system. And this is configurable. The interface is quite easy. So you can react to something happening in SciNote in outside system and create something, do something with it. I just wanted to show a bit more of a graphical presentation, how this look like in a bit high level, but you can see on the left-hand side there is SciNote. It has user interface, it has mobile interface, but through the RESTful API, you can connect to like any other system, like procurement system, full-blown LIMS. You can create, for example, custom reports. You can integrate it with the instruments reading. Let's say Slack here is one, like a wonderful example where webhooks would come handy. So you want to like observe changes in your experiment, like those can be quite easily, pipelined into Slack, so you get a nice notification if something changes. Next slide, please. So how does this look in practice? I didn't know what to show, so I showed some JSON here. So on the left-hand side, you can see like the list of the projects. You can how this is like a humanly readable. On the right-hand side, like this is a result of having call to the project's endpoint. So this kind of structure you get. So you can see it's quite like it can almost map one-on-one. So you can see like all the information you have there, Yeah, next slide, please. So when designing the SciNote API, we try to stick to some principles which are maybe not as common in some other APIs, but they're not like really different. Like they're just we'll get to there. So it's RESTful API with a standard create, update, read functionality. Doing like it's like it is having conversations in JSON. We try to be really transparent and non-opinionated, and what this means is we want to with the API we want to cover as many use cases as possible. So or giving you the opportunity for your use case that you can use it. By being completely non-opinionated there, it means that sometimes like this can be a bit of like using the API can be a bit cumbersome, but more importantly, it can be done. So like whatever you're having, whatever is your use case, most probably it can be done through our API. We use OAuth2 as an authentication method, which brings us to next point. So every request in SciNote is done on behalf of a user. So user is creating or approving for a third-party application using the API. User is approving that it may use like his name as or his user account as account on behalf of every API request will be done. Why did we decide for this approach? Just like from knowing the industry, we know that there are either strong organizational rules, there are strong standards, like in the field of work, there is strong legislation. So by using this approach, we log, we handle the permissions, we handle the audit trails as it was done by a user. Like there is a second benefit of that. So if you want to, if you want to integrate with two different systems, that should have two different read, access to access to two different pieces of data in SciNote. You can configure like a permissions on a user level that one integration has access to this part of the data in your SciNote, and the other integration has only access to this data, to this part of the data. It is counterintuitive sometimes, but when you start thinking about it, it makes then quite a bit of a sense. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, so I expect at the end of this webinar, everybody knows the list of the possible endpoints that we have in the SciNote. So as you can see, these are all of the endpoints that we have currently. As you can see, it's quite transparent. So you can see there are some, like if you're a bit of a technical person, you can see there, like when you have this many-to-many relations, you can see this be reflected here. So you have project comments. This is really a relation between projects and comments. So you would be able to get those, and you would be able to see the quite a good representation of how the data looks in our database. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah, so we were building our API endpoints as we went, so as the need arose. And this was, I think this was like the best approach, because we were always talking with our clients, like how they will use the API endpoints, what are their use cases, what are their data flows. So, for example, webhooks were completely done in collaboration with David. So I think they were actually his idea for the implementation that he will show later on. And yeah, we are here to help. So we have done for some clients, like this completely unopinionated approach wasn't really a correct one. So we have in our repository now some, I think there should be around 10 of them, some really like higher level endpoints that are, I don't know, for locking the tasks, for example, because locking the task means changing quite a bit of those. Like we would need quite a bit of calls on those endpoints, but like it's a task where some like where multiple events needs to happen like in a row. So we have some of those, and if you find a need and it is general enough, we're here to implement it. We're also here to help you with your implementation, to help you with the ideas, to help you with the design of your system. So I think that's pretty much it.
Perfect. Thank you, Miha. That's a great overview of SciNote's API, and I think that set up a really kind of baseline or basic understanding of how things work within SciNote. So thank you. So now we're gonna go into the next part, which is some API use cases, and our first presenter will be Dave, who will talk about how the API is being implemented in FogPharma. Dave, please take it over.
I'm wearing a different shirt. Looks very similar. And I will say that Miha and I collaborated on the webhooks, and there was one meeting where Miha and his colleagues asked, what's your objective? What's your ultimate objective for the webhooks? And I said, to win a Nobel Prize. It wouldn't be for me. I am not a scientist. I'm going to go through a couple scientific slides explaining what Fog Pharma does. In effect, we're a platform company, which means we've designed a way to design drugs, but we're also a biotech that currently has a candidate drug in phase 1 trials for oncology. Staple peptides are our thing. These are miniature proteins that are locked in a conformation that makes it possible for them to penetrate cell membranes with greater predictability and regularity. And then because of their conformation, they also have affinity for binding to proteins inside cells. So our first drug is actually is a direct beta-catenin inhibitor, which is something that has been on what our founder likes to call the oncology wall of shame for decades. Everyone knows it's a cancer driver. No one's been able to drug it directly until now. All of the graphics and content here, if you're curious, it's all taken directly from our website. And so again, small molecule, they're not small molecules, but they have the cell-penetrating capabilities of small molecules. They're not antibodies, but they have the binding affinity of antibodies. So hopefully we're onto something. So I'm going to talk about 2 use cases. Compound inventory synchronization and assay data warehouse ingestion. I like to think of systems as users. And so when I'm evaluating a product like SciNote, it's very important for there to be an API because I want the system to be able to behave as if it were a user. And the more comprehensive that API is, the more opportunity there is to expand the scope of what that user can do. And you know, in my opinion, if a product doesn't have an API, it's tantamount to a glorified spreadsheet, and it ends up creating more work for my end users. So SciNote's got a great comprehensive API. So that's it. That's how it works. It's obvious, right? No, just kidding. So here's a sequence diagram of the compound inventory synchronization. There's a compound management system, which is a third-party package. That's our compound management department synthesizes peptides and stores them, and then dispenses them to scientists performing assays. We have a separate system for registering those compounds at the virtual level and the batch level. At the time this integration was implemented, we were using Jenkins for most of our job automation. We've started to shift over to using some AWS EventBridge cloud-based scheduling. Works basically the same way. It's a little more elaborate, and it depends on your opinion. I think that's easier to maintain because they handle all the infrastructure. We're also doing a lot of Node.js at the time for various reasons. We kind of migrated to Python in the last 3 years. This thing was built about 3 years ago. So a couple notes about how this works. So prior to the implementation of SciNote, the compound registry was polling, the compound management system was polling the compound registry periodically, like literally every 15 minutes, to check to see if there were new peptides being registered, and then pulling that data. Compound registry at the time of this implementation did not have a versatile public API, so that integration between compound management and compound registry was, I wouldn't say it was native or direct, but it was tantamount to that. The Jenkins job also runs on a separate schedule, and it pulls the compound management system, which from the perspective of Jenkins is serving as a proxy for the compound registry, right? So if we could have pulled the compound registry directly, probably would have done that. There's a lot of data. So tens of thousands of records need to be evaluated to see if there have been additions, deletions, or modifications. And ultimately, our goal is to synchronize the inventory. So we're actually pulling all of the records from both systems and comparing them. So we do that in a parallelized fashion. It's paginated. So, you know, you're not going to pull 100,000 records in a single request. Maybe you pull 10,000 at a time or less than that, and you just wait until all the API calls are done, and then you evaluate. Sometimes they're in sequence, sometimes they're not. And then we get the diffs and we push. It's a pretty common use case. And it works great. One thing I would note is you have to remain aware of performance issues. You don't want to hammer your system with API calls. So sometimes you got to throttle down so you don't send 10,000 requests in 2 seconds, and then things stop working. And you go, huh? Assay data warehouse ingestion, also very simple, as the diagram indicates. So this is not implemented, this is planned. Before the end of the year, this will be online. It looks very similar, right? So here we're making use of the SciNote webhook so that we don't have to constantly poll to see if a new experiment has been entered into SciNote, and if there's an attachment of assay data to that experiment. We don't have to modify the user interface to require an end user to press a button to inform the downstream systems that event has occurred. That's what makes the webhook great. It responds when an activity is logged, and it can send a request to any URL. In this case, it's expected to be AWS Simple Notification Service endpoint. That will be associated to an AWS Lambda function. So the notification will trigger the Lambda. The Lambda will make a series of API calls, but ultimately to get the attachment from the experiment, and then parse that. That'll be written in Python. And then the data will be pushed into the assay data warehouse using its API. And that's it. Makes it simple. It makes it obviously repeatable. Takes user error out, as was indicated. Enables us to do exception handling and logging. It's secure. It's a great solution. Thanks. And I'll hand it off to Shyam.
Thank you for that. That second example that you gave actually gave me some interesting ideas for things I could do here as well. So I'm very glad to see that.
That's what I find with webinars. It's like I'm always learning new things. Even though I work at SciNote, I'm learning new things every time that I talk to different users. So that's great. Thank you, Dave.
All right. So I am with Advanced Cellular Dynamics. So we are a contract research organization. These first two slides are just kind of our standard slide deck, just to give an overview of what we do. So we have a very broad range of services. We started off with kind of high throughput kinase inhibitor profiling, and from there we've expanded out to, I mean, pretty much all the different services you see here. I don't think I need to go through all of these for this presentation, but on top of that, we have all of the equipment for that. We have an advanced laboratory suite. We do vivarium services, which seems to be a little bit unique in the CRO world. But most importantly for this presentation is that we have tried to make our lab notebook entries and our kind of inventory and billing and all that as transparent as possible to the clients. And the API has been instrumental in making that work in a way that's not overly cumbersome to everyone in the lab. So skip one. Okay, so the first use case, and these are a little bit more high level than Dave's use cases, but we have structured our SciNote in a way that each client basically is its own team in SciNote, and then we have shared inventories to share a lot of common reagents, but we also want to be able to specify that some reagent was paid for and is specifically for use by a client, and we want them to be able to see our actual stock of that in real time, because we've had clients that really do want to know how we're using all of the money that they're giving us. And so between the inventory and then also trying to give regular access to notebook entries, before using the API, it was kind of, we just had to do the manual exports on SciNote and then clean up anything that related, any mention of other clients. Basically, we want to make sure that each client's information is separate and that there's no risk of crossover. And obviously that has potential for human error, and it's just time consuming. So the API really kind of solved all of that in one sweep. So with the API, I'm able to, I've have systems in place to either regularly or occasionally on demand, depending on the client, export inventory items of specific inventories that the client might need to see, and also export lab notebook entries, and then automatically sanitize all the data so they're only seeing their own information. There's no risk of showing them anything they're not supposed to see. The next one is related, but also kind of it initially started as an internal system just because we manage all of our supply requests and kind of ordering through SharePoint, and we've done so for a while, and it's kind of tied into a couple other systems in SharePoint. So we didn't want to move that away, but we also wanted to automatically move things over to SciNote, because otherwise everyone has to enter every item that we receive twice, both in SharePoint and in SciNote. So with this, it's a fairly simple system. We just there's already a nice form in SharePoint, and we made SciNote inventories with similar columns, and just sending all the data to, for this, I think I've been using Python, just a Python server that's going, and it basically, anytime there's a new inventory item in SharePoint, it'll get sent to the Python server, it'll get parsed, and then get sent over to SciNote, and there's no need to worry. Since the stock column came out earlier this year, I think, I had to do a few updates, but that's working great now as well. So it's easy to just automatically update the stock column, so everyone doesn't have to worry about updating the stock column after an inventory, if an inventory item already exists in the SciNote inventory. The third use case I have here is, so this one kind of touches on Miha's point about extended functionality. So this is one where we wanted to move our oligonucleotide record sheet basically from Excel into SciNote. But the issue with that was that it was, at least at the time, it was a little bit cumbersome to do bulk entry of oligonucleotides, to enter, multiple items kind of all in one smooth workflow, compared to an Excel sheet where you can just kind of type what you need, paste, enter, and you're already on the next column. So I basically rebuilt that Excel functionality in a web interface, and it will automatically, figure out the latest numbers in our SciNote inventory. It'll tag them. It'll make it easy for the end user to just enter the sequence, the comments that they want, and submit. It'll go to the SciNote inventory, and then they'll get a nice Excel sheet that they can use for actually ordering the oligos through our provider. So that has kind of, that's kind of been a theme for a lot of things that we've been trying to do and are continuing to try to do, is move away from Excel spreadsheets and move into kind of the more tied in functionality of SciNote. So this way we can, for oligos, we can now easily tag oligos in experiments. We can keep track of exactly how many times an oligo has been used or where it's been used, all of that. And this just makes it a little bit, this web interface just makes it a little bit easier for our end users to enter new oligos. And that's kind of the bulk of our current use cases. There's a few other ones that we have planned and maybe a few small ones, but I can go over those if we have time or if there are any other questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sean. So this is great because we have two pretty different use cases, and it shows really the diversity of API allows you to kind of make the connections and pull different data and make calls and whatnot. So I want to go back to a share screen and I want to do a very quick discussion before we go into the Q&A session, which is we have seen all these use cases and you know, Dave and Sean, you have personally being involved in kind of putting together and connecting through API and Miha, you have been helping a lot of users in putting, you know, making sure API works and whatnot. So the question is, and I think this is the information a lot of people are looking for, what are some really practical considerations when it comes to API implementation? You know, what are the things that if as someone who wants to start implementing this, what are the steps or what are the considerations that one should consider? And Miha, we'll go to you first.
Okay. So as I said before, so the API is a passive system, right? So there will be need to develop some system that will talk with an API. So there is some cost to be expected on that front, right? I think the second consideration that I see the most is don't go into any implementation too early. You really need to think about how your data is structured on one hand, and what are the processes in your company. Because not knowing your processes will end up in a debate or in a changes of your implementation too late in the process, right? And that is costly. So maybe third one is a piece of advice. I'm not sure, like now by seeing Dave's slides or seeing both slides, I'm not sure that this is general applicable, especially for bigger organizations. But I think you should start small. So try to automate or try to automate the painful points first. But now I remember we're talking with David, so he was building a system that will be used by different groups of people. So and usually, yes, you cannot have one group of people waiting for your implementation a year and a group of people that are the loudest, that they get it first. But still, like, start small, but not smaller than needed. So.
Great. Thank you, Miha. And that sounds like also a lot of managing that change, right? That transition and change and understanding the process very well. Dave, do you have anything else to add on your end? When it comes to practical, like based on your experience, you know, practically, what should people consider when it comes to API implementation?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. If you can work in a test environment, do that. Don't start your exploration of the API in the production system, and test. You can think of API calls as triggering chain reactions. So if you have a mistake, you know, you can expect that mistake to happen 10,000 times in the first 8 seconds.
That would not be nice.
You don't want that happening in your production system.
It's a snowball.
As Miha said, be patient, start small, and work in a protected environment. Contain your blast radius.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Sean, do you have anything to add to that, or whether there's any other considerations that you think people should consider when it comes to API implementation?
No, I think that covers it pretty well. I was gonna say a similar thing to Dave. I made that mistake very early on, and I realized that I should be testing things in a much smaller scope, and you know, ideally just a separate environment. But it was a little bit of a pain to have to go back and write something to fix the mistake I made in just a couple seconds.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I think that sounds like the key message is really, you know, understand your process and also test your in a protected environment or at the smaller scale, just so that you get more familiar with it and before you scale up. So that's great. Thank you so much for your advice. So now we're gonna have a little bit of time for the Q&A, and I already see one question in the Q&A box, and I have another one that was from the a couple more from the registration. So the first question we have is probably more directed to Sean. Sean, do you think the SharePoint integration is also possible without an external server?
So at least between SharePoint and SciNote, there is a decent bit of like parsing of the data that needs to be done. It's not, something that they can one-to-one communicate with each other. So you do need somewhere for that data to be parsed and processed before it moves between servers. I know initially I did use a lot of Microsoft Flow for like simple stuff. I haven't delved too deep into that for actually processing data, but I know it's possible. It's supposed to be like a less code, or what do you call it, like a low code interface for developing systems like that, and then it would run on Microsoft's own server, so you don't have to do it yourself. But at least personally, I think it was a lot easier for me to just set up a separate Python server. I have it for other reasons as well. It's working with a lot of our internal data processing, so it was easy to tack on this additional functionality.
Perfect. Thank you, Sean. I'm gonna ask one question that's actually through the registration form. I think this is applicable to a lot of things, a lot of people who are looking to use API. So we get a lot of questions about, is it possible to integrate SciNote with, and then bracket, insert your preferred software platform? And I have seen LIMS, I've seen Notion, I've seen a few other things, or inventory for, other things. And then so the question here is like, I think this might be more for Miha, right? What is exactly the capacity and of course I encourage everyone to contact us, but from your development side, what are your thoughts, Miha?
So the short question is it can. The long answer is it can, but you need to know what you want to achieve, right? You need to know what is the process, why. So the question is not whether can it, but why would I like to have that? And once you have that answer, our answer back, it can be like more easily phrased. So we can say, yes, you can do it, and you should do it by like updating the inventory and use it in that way. Because like this, it's quite this term integration is really a huge umbrella term that can be integrated. Yes, it can be. You need to know what you want to achieve. What are your data flows? Very complicated things can be done, as David showed. So answer is yes.
Okay. And I think also David shows like the kind of planning or understanding the flow of data is critical when it comes to this type of like having software connecting to each other, right? Dave, do you have anything to add on that point?
I would just echo the sentiment that it can integrate with anything because the API is comprehensive, and for better or worse, that's still unusual in this industry, and so I think that's what makes SciNote stand out when we picked it.
Right. That's a good point, because like those endpoints, depends on what kind of endpoints are available. Great. Thank you so much. So we have a few questions now in the Q&A box. So first one is as API evolves, how will change be communicated, i.e., e.g., changing the parameters for a specific endpoint? Who would like to take on this questions? Sean, do you have any input on that, or anyone else?
I mean, I'm assuming that's more about how the Sino API changes, and at least
Okay, I see.
Yeah, I mean, from my experience, it's very well communicated. I'll get an email about it, and especially with things like I know Dave worked with Miha on webhooks. From our end, I've requested a couple specific endpoints, and the communication is just very clear. They're all very helpful about over there.
Perfect. And Miha, can you add to that? In general, how do we communicate API changes?
I'll try to be quick. So we are really protective about the changes in the API. We don't want to do it. We know that there are no systems integrated, and any changes could be breaking many implementations. So we're really, really careful about it. On the other side, the SciNote has reached a level of maturity where internal data structure isn't changing anymore, or is changing pretty slowly. So this reflects in the API. So as the data structure is not changing anymore, the API is not changing anymore. So if we're doing some additional changes, like additional fields or smaller changes, we always try to do like upgrade and not break for back. So of course, there will be a point in time when we will need to have a version 2 of the API and deprecate the version 1 that is coming. But so if there is a smallest possibility for a breaking change, we communicate it via email. We have a list of users that are or of the clients that are using our API. So we have a mailing list where we would notify you as soon as we would detect there is a need for a change in the API. So this is like month 2 before the release, so you have a time to prepare to any possible changes.
Excellent. That's great. Thank you, Miha. The next question is our lab struggles with the accurate management of inventory usage, such as stock management. Could API be applied to help with this? When an inventory item is assigned to a task, could we integrate a balance and have the weight amount auto deducted from the corresponding inventory, eliminating user entry error? It feels like a very specific use case, and it's really the connection between a physical equipment, a balance to the inventory management system. So I don't know whether anyone here can. I mean, at the end of the day, it might be a case where please make sure to Actually, I will reach out at the end of the webinar to see is there perhaps our customer success team or even Miha can provide some input when we better understand the actual needs, like specific needs, and how we can address that. But I don't know whether Dave and Shyam might have any thoughts on this, the possibilities? And Shyam, especially you mentioned stock management earlier with the API use.
I mean, it sounds like it should be possible, but you do need a scale that can communicate is the main thing. So as long as your scale can communicate, how much, what it's actually weighing and what the actual mass is, you should be able to get that back in the SciNote.
Right. I think that's also another thing is to make sure that, it does need to, it is a digital, thing, right? So you do need to connect through a digital means. And if your scale does not provide API or does not have that digital means of communicating, then that might be out of the question, or will be extremely difficult. But if the digital scale does provide some level of API, some support and method of communication, then that's definitely possible. And Miha, do you have anything to add to that?
No. Thanks.
Sounds good. Perfect. Let's go to the next question. Is it possible to set up some customized graphic user interface using the API? Anyone has? It's probably under that bracket of integration that we're looking at to really look at specific cases that we need to address. But Dave, Shyam, Miha, anything to add? Anyone?
Maybe I can like in the means of nesting some of your interface into SciNote user interface. We don't have that capability at the moment. But I think Shyam showed a perfect example where a custom interface was built to interact with a SciNote.
Okay. And yeah, Dave, sorry, go ahead, Shyam.
Oh no. I was just saying if it's so that was for like an entry case. I have initially before we moved to something else, we were keeping track of like time spent on projects through Sino. And that was kind of one of the API endpoints that we had requested early on to facilitate that in a weird way. But basically, I was able to use the API to extract all that information that we were keeping track of in the comments. But and then I could build a graphical interface displaying that data. But it really is like a case by case basis. It really depends on what you want to do. And like Miha said, it's not something that you don't build a graphical interface in the SciNote interface itself. It would be a separate tool that you're building.
Right. Dave, do you have anything to add? Sorry, I kind of interrupted you earlier.
It depends on the scope, really. I mean, you're not going to replace the SciNote UI. There's no value in that. But for isolated use cases, some of which may be elaborate, yeah, as I've said a couple of times, the API is comprehensive. There's very little you can't do with it. So almost any workflow, I think, if the existing user interface doesn't accommodate it, and this was another aspect of why we selected SciNote, is one of our guiding principles is that the product should yield to our requirements. It shouldn't force us to change our workflow to accommodate usage of the product, right? So there's a lot of tools out there which have a lot of features, but you can't exactly do things the way you need to. So yeah, I would say a qualified yes to answer that question.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dave. That's a great thorough kind of context to it as well. So I have one final question, I believe. Are there any API critics or measurement use of the API, Miha? I think that's for you.
No. I think we're throttling at some point. We're throttling like if you're doing too much requests at the same point and you're like putting burden to our servers, then we start throttling. We delay the response a bit. But no, currently there are no credit points or something similar.
Perfect. All right, so I think that's all the questions we have. And then so that sort of is almost at the end. So we're gonna end this with a question for everyone who is attending the webinar, which is, what is your takeaway from this webinar? And here is a reminder to please make sure to fill out the feedback survey that we have, and I believe Laura is already sharing that information in the chat box. And also, you will receive a link to the survey in our follow-up email that you should receive very shortly. So as a very last step, I would like to say thank you to everyone, especially our speakers. Dave, thank you for joining us. Shyam, thank you for joining us, as well as Miha. And please make sure to let us know if you have any additional questions about API usage, and we'll be happy to answer that. I will also be follow-up. I think some questions that we have, I'll be following with you to see if there's anything else we can help with. That's it. All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you at the next webinar. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.